28, so that should be what she sees.
Sylvia, I was told that you'll see what SOSU is televising, and I'm not sure if they've started. So can we pause the meeting for a minute?
Sure.
Thanks.
Feedback there, he can't get any mics, so I don't know if it's something you can help him with, but he can't start the meeting back there.
Sylvia, we're having technical difficulties, so we're going to we're going to pause it for just a few minutes until we can get it resolved.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to restart.
Okay. Thank you. So we are picking back up on item 4, approval of minutes from the regular City of Reno Planning Commission meeting on March 20th, 2024. My understanding is that Sylvia was not in attendance, so she will be, Commissioner Villanueva was not in attendance, so she will be abstaining. Do we have any other abstentions or questions?
Commissioner Volto, same abstention.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Velto.
Commissioner Munoz, I'd like to move to approve the minutes.
Okay, have a motion. I'll entertain a second.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer, second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Closing item 4, we'll move on to item 5, public hearings. Any person who has chosen to provide his or her public comment when a public hearing is heard will need to so indicate on the request to speak form provided to the secretary. Alternatively, you may provide your comment when item 3, public comment, is heard at the beginning of the meeting. We'll begin with item 5.1, LDC 240037, Gentry Conditional Use Permit, and we'll begin with a presentation from city staff.
Le-
Can you turn your mic on, please?
Is it on?
Thank
Is it
you.
on now?
Yeah, can you
Okay.
start over, please?
Sorry. For the record, this is Leah Picotti, Associate Planner with the City of Reno Development Services. And this evening, I am presenting an application for a conditional use permit for outdoor storage at 85 Gentry Way. The subject site is 1.32 acres, and you can see it highlighted on the screen there in yellow. It is located near the intersection of Gentry and Virginia. It's just one property over from being on Virginia, so it is addressed off of Gentry. That is just southeast there of the Pepper Mill and northeast of Moana Park and Stadium. Here you can see the zoning district and all the surrounding zoning districts is mixed-use urban. When we looked at this request to reestablish the nonconforming use of outdoor storage in the mixed-use urban zoning district, the key issues that we analyzed here were the overall site design, compatibility with surrounding developments and surrounding uses, conformance with Reno Municipal Code, and conformance with Reimagine Reno Master Plan. Here you can see the overall site design, and it's a little hard to make out up there, but basically what you're looking at is in the center of the screen there in that dark gray area. That is the existing access easement for the house and for the an existing telecommunication facility that's on the corner of the property up there. And the rest of that dark area is what would be proposed as the outdoor storage area. You can see to the left-hand side of that, the existing house, and again, that telecommunication facility up there in that corner. And then on the other side of the gray area is an existing parking lot that is paved. It will need to be striped. And then adjacent to that is Gentry. We have several conditions of approval on this as it is a non-conforming use, but basically we're asking that the storage be restricted to the 15,000 square foot site that's shown there on the plan, that we maintain that access easement for access to the residents and to the telecommunication tower. There are 2 existing cargo container, shipping container type structures on the property that do require a permit, and they will need to be permitted. That gray area shown on the site plan will need to be paved, prevent debris and everything else from coming out into the street. The existing parking lot in the front adjacent to Gentry will need to be striped. And then there is existing landscaping along Gentry. You can kind of see it in that island up there. We just need to make sure that all of the irrigation is properly working for that and that that is being maintained. And then condition 12 is that there is a freestanding sign located on the property that's been abandoned for quite some time. Per Reno Municipal Code, they need to remove that within 6 months. It's been over that. And so as a condition of approval of this, we are requesting that they either permit that sign or remove it within 30 days of a decision by the Planning Commission. Regarding compatibility with surrounding development and uses, I wanted to show you guys this aerial of the area because I think it's important to understand what we see in this area currently and the uses that are trending in this area. So you can see up in the corner there, the Pepper Mill, and you can see those hotels, I believe it's like the Vagabond and other ones located right there by Virginia. And then you can see the parcel highlighted in blue. And what we see a lot of in this area is mobile home uses. We have a lot of mobile home parks in this area, and what we're seeing this trending toward is high-density residential apartment complexes. So we do have 2 that have been permitted in this area here in the last few years. And as this area continues to be approved, being that there's no maximum density in this area, we believe we're going to see more of those apartment complexes. And then with that, we'll see more commercial uses, service uses, and employment type uses coming into the area. So here's just a little bit closer look at the compatibility of surrounding development and uses. You can see again the parcel in question is highlighted there in blue. Along Virginia Street, right in front of that, we have 2 auto repair facilities, and then we have a grocery store market type business there on the corner. Cat a corner from that, there's a restaurant, I think it's a Wendy's with a drive-through, and then we have an auto repair kind of directly across the street on Gentry. To the east of the property, directly to the east, we have a 47-unit apartment complex, and then the Triumph dealership is right there, and then we have another apartment complex that's fairly recently developed with 43 units. We do have 1 existing outdoor storage use located on Gentry, and I did point it out there for you, kind of on the bottom of your screen there. So here regarding compatibility, the whole site has an existing chain link fence around it, except for the area with the parking there. And we are asking as a condition of approval that they install slats throughout that 6-foot chain link fence to kind of help screen the area. In addition, where I have it highlighted in yellow up there, the applicant is going to install a 5-foot wide landscape buffer with dense evergreen hedge, 5 feet in height at the time of planting. That'll just mitigate some of that visual impact off of Virginia Street and also for the neighbors of that 47-unit apartment complex. Regarding conformance with the master plan, this is kind of a tough one, and I know you guys haven't seen this before, but we came up with this idea of creating a temporary conditional use permit where this would be good for a period of 5 years in this case. So when we looked at the master plan, we have some conflicting policies here. So policy 2.2A calls out that we prioritize locations for infill and redevelopment. And the places that we want that, based on the master plan, is downtown and convention center, regional centers, which this is right smack in between, innovation areas, redevelopment districts, which this is also in one of those redevelopment districts, and it's also in the urban corridor. So this is really an area where we want to see that infill and redevelopment, and it's probably not somewhere where we really want to see outdoor storage on a long-term basis. We also have a master plan policy that says that we continue to identify new ways to reduce barriers and streamline this for new businesses. So in this case, we came up with this idea to apply a condition that would basically make this temporary for a period of 5 years. This will allow the applicants to store their equipment there while they figure out if this is a business that's going to work for them, and then find an alternative location within 5 years. We feel that when we're looking at the development in this area, that we're going to see some more of that high-density residential. We're going to see more infill. We're going to see more of those commercial uses and those service-oriented uses and those employment uses in this area. What we're not going to see more of is industrial uses in this area. So we hesitate to approve that on a permanent basis, which is why we added condition number 14 there. Here are the conditional use permit recommended findings. Staff did look at these. Overall, we did find that it's reasonably compatible with the existing uses and existing development in the area. There are existing public services and facilities, and it's not going to be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. So staff was able to make all of the findings. That concludes my presentation. The recommended motion is on the board. I believe the applicant does not have a presentation, but is available for questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Appreciate it. So because the applicant doesn't have a presentation, I'll just move it back to the commission for disclosures. Commissioner Velto, will you please start?
Commissioner Veltoe, familiar with the area, and I spoke with an interested party from one of the neighboring hotels and casinos.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer, no disclosures?
Commissioner Becerra, read through the materials, familiar with the site.
Commissioner Munoz, no disclosures.
Commissioner Villanueva, familiar with the site.
Commissioner Armstrong, familiar with the site? With that, we will now move to public comment. I have no request to speak forms. Michelle, is anyone wishing to speak via Zoom?
There's no one on Zoom. We did not receive any voicemails, no correspondence, and no request to speak forms.
Anyone in the chambers wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none. We'll close public comment and open it up to the commissioners for questions of the staff or applicant.
Sure. Perhaps for Leah. Thank you, Chair. I noticed that the NAB meetings were canceled, the ones that this was assigned for. And in that same vein, there was indication that there was no public comment. But it's kind of difficult maybe to share public comment if those are usually like the main avenues for folks to share comment. Outside of those avenues, did folks receive public input, and was that public input considered?
Thank you for your question, Leah Picotti, for the record. So while the NAB meetings were canceled, they're not necessarily a requirement for this type of application. Per our standard noticing procedure, we did send out noticing to, courtesy notices and hearing notices to all property owners within 750 feet of the property. In addition, we ran our legal ads and we posted the property with a hearing notice. Had we had any interest in this project coming from the neighbors, we probably would have had them do some sort of meeting on site in lieu of the NAB. But in this case, we received no public comments, so we didn't require that.
Okay. And just to follow up, if I may. Sure. It's kind of a separate note. You mentioned that the CUP is like a temporary CUP for 5 years. Just for my understanding, and perhaps the other commissioners, how did you arrive at 5 years? Like, why not 2.5? Why not 4?
It was in discussions with the applicant that we came up with 5 years. That was what they said they needed.
Oh, 5 years. So would another applicant receive 5 years? Are we setting like that as the standard, or would it be different for other folks?
It could be different based on any
Okay.
application.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leah.
I don't want to forget about Commissioner Villanueva on Zoom. Do you have any questions at this time?
Yeah, I do have a question. So, Leah, this application, it's non-conforming, and that is, can you explain to me a little bit about why it's non-conforming and whether or not it can fit into the land use code, or if it does fit into land use code? Can you dive into that a little bit for me so I can understand?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question, Commissioner Villanueva. So this property is located in the mixed-use urban zoning district, and outdoor storage is allowed in the mixed-use urban zoning district, but only in specific designated areas. And with your staff report, you received a map that shows where those areas are and what zoning does allow for it. So while we do allow it in the mixed-use urban zoning district, we just don't specifically allow it in this location, which is why it's considered a non-conforming use. And again, this property has been used commercially for many, many, many years, and we don't necessarily have all of the business licenses to show what all has been approved here, but we can definitely say that this use has been, that outdoor storage has been happening on this property, whether as an accessory or a primary, for many, many, many years, which is why the applicant was able to come back in and request that that non-conforming use be reestablished through the approval of a conditional use permit.
For the outdoor storage, what type of outdoor storage is it that they are anticipating? Is it like those large pod, what are they, shipping containers, or is it vehicles? What is it exactly?
So approval of this permit would allow any type of outdoor storage. Specifically, there's a company right now called Snow Lion, and they deal with snow removal equipment. That's what they would like to have there.
All right, no questions, no further questions right now. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, do we want to move into discussion or perhaps entertain a motion?
I do have some more questions, if I.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Commissioner Villanueva.
So Leah, as for staff, on behalf of staff, when you were looking at the application, you guys did determine ultimately that this doesn't really make sense for long-term outdoor storage. So what happens after the 5 years? I see the condition says that there's no extensions. That seems set in stone, no extensions. So what is it? What's the next? I mean, are they going to sell the property? I mean, it seems a bit arbitrary in the sense of like, we chose 5 years and then we'll figure it out from there. It doesn't seem like we have long-term solutions. Can you just dive into that for me a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Leah Picotti for the record again. I would have to defer what the long-term solution is to the applicant, but I can tell you that from staff's perspective, it was difficult on this one to make the findings. And we felt that while it may be an appropriate use right now for that area, it may not ultimately be appropriate long-term. Now, one of the things that would normally be required with outdoor storage would be a solid block wall. We didn't condition that the applicant install a solid block wall because we don't necessarily want those types of uses permanently in this area. Although again, we have conflicting master plan policies where they say, you know, let's figure out creative ways to help these businesses get started. And then at the same time, you know, we have to prioritize infill and redevelopment specifically in this area. So as we analyzed this project, we sort of weighed those two competing policies, and what we came out with was the potential for a temporary conditional use permit. We spoke with the applicants about it. We talked about 3 years, we talked about 4 years, we talked about 5 years, and ultimately they requested 5 years. At the end of that 5 years, so if this is approved today, that expiration will be tied to the business license. So that's how we'll monitor it through the next 5 years. At the end of 5 years, I'm not sure what the plan is, but I can tell you that the property has been owned by the same family for a very, very, very long time. So I think that they understand that this use would only be allowed for a 5-year period. And I think that they may have plans to move forward with something different after 5 years, but I would have to defer to the applicants on that.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Whenever the chair is ready to move into discussion or continue discussion, I can chime in at that point.
Sounds good. Do we have any follow-up questions? Commissioner Becerra.
Sure. It could be for Leah or the applicant, and I don't want to belabor it, but I'm just curious why 3 years wouldn't work. Like, 5 years is not temporary. I mean, it is in that it will eventually arrive. But I'm a big fan of shortening the feedback loop, and what would people gain in the additional 2 years as opposed to from 3 to 5 years that you wouldn't know in those first 3 years if something was working or not.
So I'm going to turn that question over to the applicant, but I do want to point out that it's absolutely under the purview of this commission to make modifications to those conditions of approval. So if the planning commission does feel that a different time frame would be more appropriate, absolutely.
Great, thank you, Leah. Hey, good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Ryan Sims, Axion Engineering. I guess they're a tenant of the applicant, in this case, Snowline, ended up in this spot. They lost their lease on their previous location that they were storing equipment on, and through a friendship with the owner of the Asian market next door, identified that maybe this was a good spot to put that equipment, so they went ahead and did that. And then, as you can read in the staff report, through the business license process, it was identified that it was a non-conforming use. So the decision was made to submit this application in order to continue to store their equipment there. From what I understand, they recognize that this is not the ideal location for storing snow removal equipment. As far as I know, they are, actively or less actively looking for another site to store this equipment. But yeah, 5 years was kind of identified as they're looking at involving municipalities and agencies in the use of this equipment. So they're right now, on a sales pitch to try to get NDOT or Caltrans or somebody to, take a serious look at their equipment. So 5 years seemed reasonable for them to try to get a foothold with those types of agencies. Those procurement processes with those guys are long, often years long. And yeah, with the economic conditions currently, they just felt that 5 years was reasonable to either, be successful and find a new spot, or just find a new spot, or, to figure out what they want to do. So hopefully that answers that question.
It definitely provides some insight. Thank you so much. I'll have a follow-up to Leah on that, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of related to the conversation we're going to have in a few minutes with Angela and team, but where we discussed in the last couple of meetings where there was a data center district identified because of a trend. And this one reminds me of a case brought to us not too long ago with a couple of young gentlemen who were looking to store snowmobiles or plowing machinery and so forth, right? It seems like there's a trend there too. Do you know if we have a district identified or a region and what those might be? And if not, perhaps that's something for discussion later this evening or as feedback for that Title 18 cleanup.
I thank you for your question, Leah Picotti, for the record. I don't know that we have a district specified for that use, but definitely that use is primary outdoor storage, which we run across all the time. Mm-hmm. And we do have designated areas within the city that we allow that. There are, I think, 5 or 6 zoning districts that allow for it. And again, mixed use urban allows for it, just not in this location. So we do have areas throughout the city that require it. Outdoor storage is one of those uses where we want it screened, we want it clean, we need access, we need it paved. So conditional use permits are required in several instances with outdoor storage because it's just one of those more, I don't necessarily want to call it a high intensity use, but it's a use that requires a little bit more of us looking at it before it gets approved. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Any additional follow-up questions? I had a question actually for the applicant, just related to the 5 years.
Sure.
So you had mentioned they were kind of looking actively for other leases. Is that sort of a contingency, or is the plan right now that if we were as a body to approve this, they would enter into a 5-year lease on that property and commit to being there for 5 years? Because my concern, I guess, would be we entitle it for 5 years, but then in a year they find another spot and then they leave. And then it's just, it's entitled to this use for 4 years, and that's not really productive. So is the intent to enter a 5-year lease? Are they going to be like year to year? Is it shorter than 5 years? Do you know?
Actually, I can't really speak to that. from what I know, they have had little luck in finding another location up until now, knowing that with the business license issues, they were actively looking for a place to go. So I don't know if there's any commitment to stay for 5 years. The use is very passive. The equipment is there. They don't conduct sales there. Basically, it's once in a while, a truck will come and get a piece of equipment and leave. Maybe for a trial or something and then bring it back. But it's, once in a while there's movement on the site. As far as at the end of the 5 years, the owner, I don't think has any plans, for development or sales or anything like that. So, as far as I know, they'd have no plans for development at this time.
Thank you, appreciate it. Any additional follow-up, or do we want to move to discussion? Okay, discussion?
Sure.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting case. I would say that the long, narrow nature of the parcel makes it hard to do a lot of development, especially like a multifamily. That seems to be where the indication of the future land use could be. I can support this project because it's got a telecommunications facility. It has had outdoor storage. This is just a continuation of a discontinued use that might have been, I don't know when the most recent use of outdoor storage was in that location. And I actually commend staff because I think that the 5-year CUP is a creative approach to solving this problem. And it's like an incubator for this business. So that's a good thing for Reno. Thank you.
Commissioner Villanueva, didn't want to forget about you on Zoom. Did you have anything for discussion?
Yeah, I also think it is a creative solution. It is definitely solution oriented. I think 5 years is too long. I understand the need to want to help this business. My concern is the location. That's very much near a major thoroughfare. There's a lot of traffic there. Whenever we do get tourists or visitors to the site, it's, Virginia Street and through that area, that's going to be an area where a lot of people kind of have their eyes on. So I do have concerns about that. I think there's a lot of growth happening in that area and we want to make that available. At the same time, it is a private property, and this is a way that the owner's trying to make available his space for someone who needs it. And so I think the solution is good temporarily. I think 5 years is too long. I would be open to 3 years just because of that site in particular. It's really not great for the character of that neighborhood in that area. I just don't think it fits well. It certainly isn't conforming. And despite the, I think staff mentioned the competing policies, I think if we really do a deep dive into some of the policies, we'd find that this outdoor storage really isn't great for the site. So I'm open to approving this with the modification from 5 to 3 years. Just because, I'd hate to say no to something like this when it does appear that they are in need of the site to continue their business. But, I just think 5 years is too long.
Commissioner Munoz.
Can I ask a question real quick of staff?
Sure.
Leah, I'm just curious if this property, say, in 3 years, 2 years, 4 years came up and they came back to us saying they wanted to sell it because they were going to build something on it, would the city have any problem doing something to amend this CUP or getting rid of it altogether so that they can go forward and change the property to something else if available?
Yes, thank you for your question. Leah Picotti for the record. It would not affect that because this is specific to that outdoor storage use. And if they said, we just want to scrap that conditional use permit and we're going to move on with a new development, they could do that without amending it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Becerra.
Great, thank you, Chair. Hey, Leah. I agree with both Commissioner Villanueva and Rohrmeyer. Creative solution, love it. I think, like Commissioner Villanueva, it's a little too long for my liking. I would even go as far as CUPing it for 1 year. And here's kind of my rationale behind it. From what we heard from the applicant, there isn't much motivation for the person to look, or maybe they are, but what I'm hearing is that there isn't much traction there and that there isn't much sales or activity going on. So if we extend it for 5 years, I think we're saying it's okay to move slow. And 3 years is still a little too long. I think that people should know within 1 year if things are working or not. But to counter that as well, I also heard from you in our earlier discussion that there's plenty of areas that are kind of designated for this kind of business. And so what I'm hoping is that we change this to 1 year or 3 with Commissioner Villanueva, and also suggest that they work with staff to find, to point them in the right direction of where these resources or places are that are more suitable for this location. So I'm a yes if it's 1 year. That's where I'm leaning.
Thank you. And just to point out, Leah Picotti again for the record, I have been working with Snow Lion for probably about 1.5 years before they applied for their conditional use permit.
Mm-hmm.
These guys had a lot of obstacles in their way, and that brought them to requesting a conditional use permit. Of course, it's under the purview of the commission to make changes to those conditions of approval, but I do want to assure you that we have been working with this applicant for a long time trying to find another option here.
And so if I may, Chair, just follow up.
Yeah, it's fine.
With that, what have been the obstacles in finding a place? If, based on your own comment earlier, there's plenty of districts that accommodate this type of business.
I would have to defer to the applicant about what those obstacles are. I just know from Snow Lion what they told me about the cost of moving this equipment, because they're not vehicles, so they're literally heavy equipment pieces. And I think it was a difference in cost between this property and other properties.
Okay.
Ryan Sims for the record. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the cost of moving and, finding a spot that meets their cost needs at this point while they're trying to get the business started. So, yeah, it's as we've seen, real estate and housing and land costs are not going down. So yeah, that's, their obstacle there is finding a place that's cost effective for them to be able to move their equipment and continue to, start up and grow their business.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Sims. I think my last comment on that for the fellow body here is that nothing's stopping folks from coming back to us a year from now if needed. But I think what I like more about the year timeframe is that it really lights the fire, if you will, to motivate folks to find a solution that's a bit more sustainable and long-term.
Any other comments from the commission?
Yeah. Commissioner Munoz.
Commissioner Munoz?
I know as a small business owner for years, if a better opportunity arises, and especially with a property like this that is not in demand at this moment, but can be in demand, I'm sure the owners of this property would come back and say, hey, we have an offer for X amount of dollars to sell this to be able to build something on here. The fact that they are able to build, they are able to change this at any time. It's not set in stone that this has to be what it is for 5 years. The 5 years I see is no issue whatsoever. Just gives them a little bit of security. Again, as a small business owner, if I find a better place that better suits me for a better cost or that's going to meet my needs, I'm not going to wait around 5 years for that to happen. I'm going to go as soon as that makes itself available. So as this sits right now, with the conditions that the city put in there. I did hear Villanueva's concerns about visibility, and it sounds like they addressed all of that from each side of the property, so that's not going to be an issue for me. So I can meet all the findings with this. I don't see any issues with it as it sits, so I am going to support it as it is, and I will make a motion when we're ready.
Thank you, Commissioner Munoz. I am very much in alignment with that perspective as well as Commissioner Rohrmeyer's perspective. The fact that they can sell, as you pointed out, without really having any baggage, I think is sort of the key factor in my decision. But I also like that it is a creative solution. I don't think 5 years is particularly too long. I think it would probably take a minimum of 5 years for that area to sort of maybe develop in the direction that the master plan has set out for it anyway. I mean, 5 years sounds like a long time, but in terms of development and like change, it's not very much time. So I think it's an appropriate amount of time, and I would support the recommendation as is, and I can make all the findings. Commissioner Belto.
I tend to side more with Commissioner Becerra and Commissioner Villanueva on this. I'm still stuck on us locking this into an option for 5 years, given where the area is going. I guess I'm not super set in either position, but I am kind of persuaded that we should reduce the time frame. So just throwing that out there for any feedback or thoughts.
I can share, Commissioner Villanueva, for the record, I can share some of my concerns are deterrence. You know, if we have people interested in that area, developing that area, whether it be multifamily or something suitable, because we are seeing a lot of that, particularly along Plum, along Virginia, along Moana, some of those places. And I just would hate for folks to be deterred because they see some outdoor storage and are concerned, don't know the details, are concerned that they're going to be they're concerned that if they develop, there'll be neighbors with this outdoor storage unit, which, I suspect may be a bit of an eyesore. And particularly that area does get a lot of visibility. So it's hard because I do get where Commissioner Muniz is coming from, because you're right, the landowners are going to want to, get the most bang for their buck if it's available. But at the same time, we're not just concerned about them, we're concerned about the community, right? And that's kind of our job here, is to consider the community and what's best for the community when looking at the findings. And so I do want to support this because I think that, they could use that assistance, but I just think 5 years is too long. So if we can reduce it, I'd be inclined to do that.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer?
I just understand very well the amount of time and effort and cost that goes into doing an entitlement application, especially for a small business. Now, we are not supposed to consider the economic impacts of projects, but the time investment that somebody has put in working with staff for 1.5 years to get to this point, to start the clock, 3 years is going to go very quickly. I don't see personally a lot of development pressure right in that location for another use at this time. I think 5 years in the life of a city is really a blink of an eye. And, it was interesting that we brought up the other non-conforming outdoor storage. That didn't have paving, that had wood chips, that didn't have landscaping. This has an investment by the applicant or the landowner with those things. That is an improvement to that location. So I would like to stick with 5 years, but I will wait to see how this unfolds.
Commissioner Becerra?
Sure. I want to support it as well. It's not like a do or die situation. I don't want to necessarily die on a certain hill of 2.5 years, 6 months, or whatever. I do have a related follow-up question, though, to help kind of guide me towards a solution here for Leah. Is 1.5 years typical for getting someone from beginning to end, meaning end in front of us? Because I heard fellow Commissioner Rohrmeyer suggest that it took 1.5 years, and I think you mentioned that as well.
thank you for the question, Leah Picotti for the record. I did, but it hasn't been solely on this entitlement because initially, this came in as a business license. So initially, we were working with the applicant through the business licensing department saying, you can't, there's no way to entitle this here without entitling it as a non-conforming use. And initially, we couldn't establish that a non-conforming use for outdoor storage had been there. So we didn't necessarily give them that option to begin with. I did extensive amount of research into this when we were just in the business licensing phase because I was trying to find something to hang my hat on to say, yes, this can come in here. And at the same time, the applicants were diligently trying to find another location. And I know that they were, I met with them on I probably met with them, I'd say 8 times before Ryan got involved. And I met with the owner of the property. I met with the Snow Lion people. We looked at maps of the city. I showed them how to use our GIS systems so that they could find appropriate locations. They just couldn't do it. And that's how we ended up at that 1.5 years. And then they did submit, but they didn't have a complete application. And then they took it back. And then they decided they weren't going to do it. And then they decided they were. And so that's why it's been an hour this long. But typically, no. Conditional use permit from the time the application is deemed complete to the public hearing is normally 60 to 65 days.
Okay, so this is kind of an exception to that.
Yes.
Okay, and so given that, all this Title 18 cleanup and everything else that we're doing is supposed to streamline the process, to remove kind of friction in folks getting off the ground, it kind of underscores my point of reducing the timeline from 5 years to X years. And if this body would indulge me, I would propose the 3 years like Commissioner Villanueva. Doesn't need to be the 1 year like I did, but I would be interested in hearing if others would indulge that timeline, particularly because we are supposed to be streamlining this process, and this is an exception to the standard timeline.
Three is better than one.
Thank you.
My personal preference, I still think, is for the 5 years, but I would also be amenable to 3 years. I mean, I think 1 year is too short. I mean, I'd have a hard time supporting that, but yeah, I'm just, in terms of getting towards the motion, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of like, what's the level of comfortability and what's, does someone want to make a motion in either direction? Is there additional feedback? Commissioner Becerra?
I was pointing at Commissioner Munoz.
Sorry, Commissioner Munoz?
Again, I'm still leaning towards the 5, but if we were able to split that down the middle and go 4, so it takes a year off, gives them another year to get to where they are, and as Commissioner Romeyer said, there is no big push in this area right now for housing. That could change, and once again, I'm still at the position that if somebody came in and offered them a large sum of money in order to move this forward, to change it from what it is now to housing, I'm sure that would be a pretty easy sale for the owner. So I would be willing to make a motion on 4 if we can get there.
Any further discussion, or should I entertain a motion?
Just one comment. With regard to the timeline, I just think we do want a little urgency to kind of kick them. I don't want to say you say it like that, but a little urgency to kind of increase the desire to move forward. So, I think everyone wants to see them succeed. I think everyone wants to see them find a place, but we do have to put that in balance with the community and the community's needs. And, we do need a little urgency there. And so that's where I am on the 3 year. I do also think 1 year is too short, 2 years is too short, and 3 is also meeting in the middle. I could get to 4. I really don't want to do 5. It seems silly that we're going back and forth over this, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. But I think it is important for us to, it's our job is to consider what's best for the community. So it's kind of my position.
Any additional discussion, or do you have anyone ready to make a motion?
Commissioner Munoz, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Munoz.
Case number of LDC 24-00037, Gentry Conditional Use Permit. Conditional use permit, based on compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the conditional use permit subject to the conditions listed in the staff with the modification of 4 years for the CUP instead of 5, and I can make all the findings.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Rohrmeyer, second.
We have a second. Can I get a roll call vote, actually?
Armstrong,
Yes?
Becerra,
Yes.
Munoz,
Yes.
Rohrmeyer,
Yes.
Valto,
Yes.
Villanueva.
Yes, I think I can get behind 4.
Okay, motion passes.
Thank you. And good luck with your project. We'll now close item 5 and move to item 6. Item 6, zoning code cleanup, and we'll receive another presentation from staff. Yeah. So. Sorry, Angela, can you turn on your mic? Oh,
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay. How about now? Okay. For the record, Angela Foose, Assistant Director with Development Services. Just kind of, again, a recap. This is our 3rd meeting to talk about the zoning code. We've been taking kind of chapter by chapter. So today we're going to go over the final 4 chapters. Similar to Final 4 in March Madness, this is the end. Hopefully we're going to get to a winner. Reminder of everyone, what was included in the zoning code cleanup? Again, this is supposed to be some pretty basic stuff. For the last 3 years, we've had a zoning code as staff. We've been keeping a list of things that, A, don't make sense to us, B, are tough to administer, things that have changed with the legislative session that now we need to update the zoning code, and some things specific to our council that they've said, what can we do to better protect residential neighborhoods? And so we've kind of taken all of that into consideration and come up with the red lines that we've been reviewing. Where we've been, we did start with a technical advisory committee. That was a group of about 30 professionals, everything from folks that were engineers to planners to architects to landscape architects, city staff, public works staff. And so we met through 7 meetings with that group, and we got their input on the changes. We made some changes based on their feedback, and then we went out to stakeholder or community feedback. We held 9 meetings. Those meetings were both virtual and in person. Those took place last fall. Where we're at today then is getting Planning Commission feedback. Now at this point, I'm not looking for you guys to make any formal recommendations yet. This is just an opportunity for you guys to provide feedback. What we'll do is after we get through our final 4 chapters, we'll go back and go over a couple of the topics that you've brought up over these last couple of meetings, make sure I have some better direction as a whole of where you want to go on some of these things. And then we'll go start to meet with our council. We'll do that in the public hearing format. So we'll be at City Council probably later this summer and early fall through a series of different meetings, again, getting their feedback. And we'll come back to Planning Commission after that, where we will have their red line changes as well. And then we'll come back to you with an actual ordinance to review and adopt. You guys are a recommending body, so we will formally go through that process. You'll make the recommendation of things that you want or don't want. That will then go back to City Council. So we have a number of different steps still ahead of us, and again, good opportunities for the public to stay involved. Okay, so again, we're going to start with that chapter on chapter 5 related to signs. Now, we do have a more robust text amendment specifically related to signs. We've been working with a consultant who is both a planning firm and a legal firm. Signs are something that we want to be cautious that we do right so that we don't get sued on and have to go to a Supreme Court and find out we're doing it wrong. So for simplicity, again, from a cleanup purpose, we have very few changes to the sign ordinance. One of them was that we have a number of different zoning districts where inadvertently we don't allow signs. That was never the intent. every zoning district should have signs allowed. When we updated our code 3 years ago, we changed some of the zoning code designations, and some of them just did not get added to the sign section. So again, super cleanup, just something like, oops, we definitely didn't want to not allow signs, so we've added those zoning districts. Second one, we have an area called a gaming overlay. The gaming overlay is typically where you have these big casinos. So the downtown is a gaming overlay, Peppermill, GSR, Atlantis. Within the gaming overlay, we, in current code, allow signs to go taller than a normal zoning district. So if you're within that gaming overlay, you can go up to 100 feet, which is about 10 stories, big signs. What we inadvertently did is our gaming overlay also includes some different buildings that are not casinos. And so we don't want the average, pawn shop or Burger King to have a 10-foot tall sign. So again, inadvertently, we didn't mean to do that. So we've just provided some clarification that if you're in the gaming overlay and you want to use those sign allowances, you also have to be a legally established gaming facility. Pretty simple. Okay, and then in section 6, within our land division, anytime you do a parcel map or a tentative map, a lot of times we'll have a common area. We see this a lot of times with subdivisions. And so we just needed to clarify that if you're doing a subdivision map where you have common area, you do not have to meet the minimum lot size. Typically, again, before we allow a new parcel to be recorded, you have to meet a minimum size. But again, these common areas are typically things like parkway strips or just kind of leftover parcels that the homeowners association is going to landscape. So we just clarified that no, you don't have to meet a minimum lot size if you're doing a common area parcel. Something we already administratively allow, but we just clarified it for the zoning code. Historic preservation. So we have a whole chapter specific to historic preservation. And you as a planning commission don't typically see a lot of these come before you. There's actually a separate commission that is specific to historic preservation. So we went through. There were a number of just, I would say, more general code cleanups. We did go to the Historic Resource Commission, went through those changes with them. We went back actually twice to make sure they were on board. So generally speaking, let's just walk through what some of those were. We had some language in there that said outside experts are allowed to provide comments and be part of the review process in terms of their technical expertise. We don't really need that in there. We have that in everyday use that we do, right? We hire traffic consultants, geotechnical consultants, architects, landscape architects. So that's just something inherently we already do. We didn't feel it was necessary and really it wasn't a code regulation. It was just a bunch of kind of extra wording. We took out some language that had to do with findings related to Historic Resource Commission. Again, it wasn't specific language that we needed. It was just kind of extra, I would say, fluff. And again, a zoning code should not have fluff. It should have standards and regulations. Related to the process for any time a new parcel or use wants to come in with that historic landmark overlay. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but they do have to go through a zone change process to get that historic overlay. They do not have to go to Planning Commission. So that's something that was already in our code, but there was some question. So we just clarified that yes, they have to go to the HRC Commission, and then they go to City Council. We clarified that they do not have to go to Planning Commission to be a part of that overlay. Okay, then some additional regulations. We had some requirements that staff reviews some types of applications, and we felt that our planning staff are not technical experts on historic resources, so we didn't want to put that burden on our staff. So we took staff out of that process, and we said those types of applications should all have to go before the Historic Resource Commission, and they shouldn't be a staff review. We as staff take in applications, we provide more of a planning recommendation, but again, the HRC is the technical experts that serve on that commission. Then again, we had some outdated things in here. We had some requirements that certain things had to be adopted by a date of 2021. That date has passed, nothing was adopted. Again, if it's not a regulation, shouldn't be in a zoning code, so we took those out. We had some regulations related to pre-application meetings. So we had a whole process. If you have a historic resource or a parcel or a building, you're required to go through this pre-application meeting where we had a separate subcommittee. That subcommittee was never established. Frankly, it just didn't make sense. It was supposed to be kind of a subcommittee of the HRC. But it's been in code for 3 years and we've never used it, so we said it doesn't even make sense. We do have a pre-application meeting for all types of applications, so anyone doing a development project can go through a pre-application meeting. It doesn't have to be specific to HRC. Again, just made it more consistent with how we have been operating for the last 3 years. And then finally, there's some language in the zoning code related to cultural resources. Our language did not match what is in the Secretary of Interior standards, so we just cleaned that up so our standards match their standards. Any questions on historic resource? Again, you guys don't see a lot of it, but it's definitely a big topic that we as staff deal with quite a bit. Okay. Next up is related to administration and procedure. So a lot of the things that we did as part of this code cleanup, we really went back and said, does our code conflict with state law? And again, anytime there's changes to state law, we should be updating our zoning code because state law potentially changes every 2 years when we have these legislative updates. This was an easy one for us just to keep a list of what are we not conforming to, what new laws changed at the state level that our zoning code now needs to meet. So we updated those. We have a lot of different types of applications. So you guys know, you see conditional use permits, you see tentative maps, you see major site plan reviews. Those are all projects or types of applications that go to a planning commission. We also have a lot of applications that go just to staff. And so we call those like minor site plan reviews or a minor conditional use permit. So a lot of times there's an application that triggers both a minor application and a major application. So from that perspective, the applicant says, well, so I have to go through one level of review for staff to review my project and then another level of review for planning commission to review my project. That doesn't really make sense. So what we have just in practice been doing is allow the applicant to kind of combine their applications and elevate those up to planning commission. So you guys are the ultimate authority. Anytime we have applications that are both staff level and planning commission level, now we just put it in writing that, yep, we can combine those and elevate it up to planning commission for review. And then in terms of some other clarity things within our administration and procedure section, there's things that are required based on working days, and there's other deadlines that are based on business days, or calendar days. And so we just, to clean that up, made sure that we're consistent with how we are phrasing these different deadlines and made sure that they, again, match state law. Okay, a couple other things in our administration and procedures. You guys have seen a handful of these specific plan districts. This is something that's been fairly new. We did them years ago, probably 20 years ago, and then we quit doing them. And so for the last 3 years, now they're back in our zoning code, and they're very similar to planned unit developments. You basically create your own separate set of zoning regulations. So we just went back and we looked at our PUD or planned unit development kind of standards and regulations, and we said, well, how do we make those more consistent with these specific plan districts? So things like a planned unit development, once it's approved by city council, it gets recorded. A specific plan development is not required to be recorded. We said, well, that's just silly. Those are documents that should be recorded, they're ordinances. So again, cleaned up some of those kind of inconsistencies, things that we in practice have been asking the applicant to do, so now we've just formalized it in our zoning code. Another big topic is tied to residential adjacency. This is basically anytime you have a non-residential use next to residentially zoned property. We had some conflicting regulations. In some sections of our zoning code, residential adjacency was triggered if you're within 150 feet. In other sections of our code, it was triggered if you're within 300 feet. So again, we took the more conservative number there and we said, let's just make it one consistent standard. So residential adjacency is any new development that's non-residential coming in within 300 feet of residentially zoned property. So we just basically took two different standards and made it so we now have just one consistent standard. Another big one is what triggers a conditional use permit for 24-hour use. There's a ton of uses, just generally speaking, that normally if you're operating after 11 o'clock at night or before 7 o'clock in the morning, you would trigger that conditional use permit. Industrial is one of those that did not trigger that conditional use permit. And so we've gotten a lot of feedback from council and just from concerns from neighbors that industrial uses, especially these warehouses with a lot of truck traffic, should have to go through that public review process so they can be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So we updated that standard, and so now all those warehouses and industrial uses now trigger a conditional use permit if they want to operate 24 hours a day. Couple other areas, again, it was things that probably seem like common sense related to that 24-hour-a-day trigger. Hotels, obviously, hotels don't shut down at 11. People can come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we didn't want to trigger a conditional use for things that inherently we know people are going to be there 24 hours a day. Freestanding birthing centers, another one, we don't want to shut those down at 11 o'clock. If you're ready to have a baby, you go have your baby. So freestanding birthing centers are something through state law that has come out as a new requirement. We have not really had them as a specific use. Basically, these are areas that are not hospitals, but they're areas that it could be like an office or frankly somebody's home, but they're licensed as a birthing center. So we would allow those to operate 24 hours a day. And then data centers, again, we've had a lot of discussion on data centers. Data centers, we allow them now in certain zoning districts, but they always trigger a conditional use permit. So we said inherently, a data center is also going to operate 24 hours a day. Inherently, because we trigger a conditional use permit for other reasons, we will allow them to operate 24 hours a day. They don't trigger an additional conditional use permit when they come in for operating 24 hours a day. And then another type of application that you guys have seen is that alternative equivalent compliance. That was a fairly new application. That was something that came out of our zoning code from 3 years ago. It's actually been pretty effective. Rather than a project having to vary or go through a major deviation, if they're able to provide a standard that maybe meets or exceeds something, like let's say there's a screening requirement, and they're like, this screening requirement doesn't really fit for this site, but we're going to do something above or better than what the code would require. So we use that AEC, or alternative equivalent compliance. Now, we have specific language on when you can use it, and for whatever reason, we had not allowed it in employment districts, and those are your industrial districts. And we said, well, that, again, seems a little short-sighted. So we just added language that, yes, you can also use that tool. It does require planning commission approval if you're in one of these employment or more industrial zoning districts. And then finally, just in terms of procedures, the Historic Resource Commission, again, there was some kind of conflicting regulations on terms and who can sit on those boards. We just cleaned it up to be more, I would say, consistent with how we regulate all these other boards. We're getting close. Okay, related to rules of construction and definitions. This, again, from a staff perspective, we run into a lot of back and forth discussion on how we measure things. And so we went back and we looked at all these different sections of code, whether we're measuring the width of a lot or a floor area ratio or density. And we said, well, the areas that we continue to run into problems, let's clarify. So again, there's a list here of some of the major ones that we just needed to clarify. Didn't make any major changes, just help to better understand so that staff has some consistent interpretation of how we regulate these things. Within just our definition section, if you've seen the red line document, it looks like we've modified every definition because it's all redlined. Not true. And the definitions, we just made them all in alphabetical order. The way that they're in our current code is they're kind of lumped into, here's all the industrial definitions, and those are in alphabetical order. And then here's all the residential definitions, and they're in alphabetical order. So we said, well, that doesn't make sense. Just take every definition and put it all in one giant alphabetical order. Again, not a lot of changes there, just more of something that made more sense, kind of more user-friendly. And then we looked at, again, just big things, what has state law changed and how is that different from our zoning code? So we cleaned all that stuff, anything that was inconsistent or redundant or in the code multiple times, we just tried to find those, make them all consistent. And then a couple more things related to definitions. again, just silly stuff that you wouldn't even know. So for instance, our definition of restaurant requires that you provide food on premise. Now, not all restaurants are on premise. Sometimes you only have to-go restaurants, right? You don't have dine-in restaurants. So again, silly things that we just thought, well, we should clean those definitions up. And so we did a bunch of that. We also added a couple new definitions. We looked at Washoe County and how they regulate childcare, so we updated our definition to match that. We added that data center definition. We looked at retaining wall. That's another one. Just as staff, we run into a lot of conflicts with how to regulate something that isn't really clearly defined. So we just cleaned a lot of those things up. Then the word condominium. You guys would see a condominium if they came through with a tentative map, but our definitions didn't actually match where a condominium should be allowed. So condominium is typically more of a multifamily type development. But again, instead of rent, they're able to sell. So each condo, each unit is its own ownership. Again, not a major issue that you guys would see, but just something from staff trying to interpret where condominiums would be allowed. We clean that up. Couple other ones too. Let's go back to the freestanding birthing center. Again, state law now requires that we have a use for freestanding birthing center, so we added that into our zoning code. The word amplification, this was a fun one. We actually define what amplified means, and it's anything that's basically louder than a restaurant, but quieter than a wedding reception. Think about that one. So we said, well, I don't even know how you regulate that. Let's change that. So we went through our definitions and just made some things that made more sense. Kitchen is another one. We've seen a ton of these motel or hotel conversions. We do require that you put kitchens in any things that you're converting from like a motel to a place where somebody's gonna live. But our definition of kitchen did not match the building code definition. So we had a lot of people that when they were converting motels, they just wanted to put in like little mini hot plates and little mini refrigerators. And we said, no, that's not a kitchen. A hot plate is what you do in college. It doesn't count as a kitchen where somebody's gonna live. So we updated our zoning code to make it match what's in the building code, and again, help us to administer how we handle a lot of these different conversions. Okay, so that covers the last 4 chapters. I do have some additional things I want to go over, just again, things we've discussed in the past couple weeks. But before we do that, is there any feedback from the group on those 4 chapters? They're definitely not as sexy as a lot of the other topics we've had, but important things that we regulate. So if there's anything you have questions on, now's your chance.
Yeah, Commissioner Velto.
Yes, thank you. Did you all consider looking at the definition of an aggrieved party for purposes of appeal in the code?
Ooh, that is a great question. Yes and no. I think we actually asked a consultant to help us come up with a definition, and we didn't land on anything that was really something we wanted to change. So we do have a lot of appeals, and there has been some question about who's an aggrieved party, but we also wanted to make sure that we're not taking anyone out of the ability to appeal, so we opted not to do anything.
Fair. Understood. I think I wish that there was more of a nexus between people who are appealing and actually affected by a proposal. But I understand why it would be difficult to write a definition that didn't exclude someone who had a legitimate interest in an appeal. So I think that's fair response, but something to hopefully consider.
Yeah, and just as an example, we've had some appeals in the past couple years where somebody appealed it that did not even live in the city of Reno. So if you live in Sparks, should you have the right to appeal in a development in the city of Reno, right? I mean, it could be 20 miles away. That doesn't mean that they don't have the right to be, they feel that they're impacted. Maybe it was a new coffee shop and they, it used to be open space. And so they drove by every day and used that open space, and now it's a coffee shop. So they felt they were an aggrieved party. So I think that's kind of where we ran into a question of, boy, that is a tough one to define. If that's something that Planning Commission would like us to expand on, I would be happy to kind of take that message forward to City Council and come up with some draft language as well.
I obviously can't speak for the planning commission, but I think that is very important, because I think a lot of these projects get held up longer than they need to, and especially with housing projects, that really has an effect on housing. So I would like to see a more streamlined process in general. But I'll just leave that out there, see if anybody else has any thoughts.
Any other comments on that, or switching gears?
Sure. I would like to just build upon that.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
just-
Go ahead, Commissioner Becerra.
Sure, just gain more insight. Is there like a, for example, that we can refer to, or?
I think for example, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of jurisdictions have a boundary. So we notice everyone within 750 feet. So some jurisdictions say you have to be aggrieved, you would have to be in that boundary of 750 feet. Again, that's something some jurisdictions use. We currently do not. At this point, anyone has the right to appeal anything. They can say they're an aggrieved party.
And if I may comment on that, and it's very strange to have that be the case from looking at it from like a due process perspective. If someone's not actually living in that sphere, that area, it's strange that they have the right to come in and stop an applicant who's putting in the work and trying to actually do something. They have the right to try to challenge it. I am totally sympathetic for anyone that's actually affected that wants to appeal it. That makes total sense. Great. But I am very concerned about how allowing anybody to appeal anything is just causing, one, hurting our ability as a planning commission to actually get things done, because it forces applicants to, they know it's going to get appealed. They know someone's going to raise an issue. They're less willing to make concessions when they come and meet with us, and less willing to present to us something that I think is more palatable, because they have to know that this is going to get appealed and be an issue. And I think it just disrupts the process, and it makes it so our job is less effective as planning commissioners, but it also just makes things cost more, because someone who's, the carrying cost on a property that you're trying to develop just goes up infinitely, or not infinitely, I guess, but a lot, the more you have it, and the longer you're waiting to go through the process. So I would like that to happen less, and I think that a lot of people that are trying to actually build affordable housing or any type of housing would probably like that to happen less. But it's difficult to create a definition that draws a bright line that makes sense and provides due process.
Okay, thank you for that. I would second that. I would support what Commissioner Velto is suggesting with the following. Sometimes folks that are aggrieved or impacted don't have the means to be here at 6 p.m. or whatever other evening meetings we hold for them to share their concerns. And so maybe additional feedback in parallel to what Commissioner Velto suggested is that we find ways to better meet folks where they're at to make it easier for them to share concerns, especially folks that would be impacted.
Yep.
Sylvia, Commissioner Villanueva.
Go ahead.
I think my concern with that is I feel like it would actually increase more costly litigation, because when you start saying people don't have a right, then that, could potentially result in, judiciary review, and whether, a court trying to determine whether or not they do in fact have rights, despite what despite whatever we decide or whatever ordinances are in place or whatever the development code says. When you limit something with regard to like due process, it could result in more costly litigation to the city. So that's just something to think about, potential unintended consequence of trying to narrow the definition.
You want to go first?
Oh.
Sorry, Commissioner Rohrmeyer?
Yeah, I think one of the greater things about the city of Reno personally is the ability to appeal a project outside of a 750 boundary, or whatever boundary is determined to be appropriate. I think of advocacy groups who speak for larger audiences, then they wouldn't be able necessarily to have a say in the public process. And we're only talking about being appealed to city council, which is a month or two at longest to get on the agenda. I don't think it's an onerous process. That's my own personal take on this. So yeah, good luck in researching this one.
I think just if I can.
Go ahead, Commissioner Velto.
Commissioner Villanueva, I think you're right. It would probably lead to some sort of litigation, but it only takes one case to get a decision as to whether it's allowed or not. And if you have one ruling that says these rules are okay, you've settled the issue. And I don't think it would lead to much litigation beyond that. The city is oftentimes involved in litigation on land use issues. And if we could limit those by getting rid of frivolous appeals, I think that would allow the city to take more seriously appeals that were serious and were legitimate. But it's an interesting point you raised about organizations becoming involved. To become aggrieved as an organization, they would only need really one member that lives in that sphere. So there's ways to get around that for those organizations. But you raise a good point, both of you all do, as to how to write the language to make it fair. But I was talking to someone recently that was telling me that the carrying cost on their project was something astounding. I want to say it was close to like $20,000 a day to carry the project, and the longer delays that happened, number may be too high, but it was an astounding number when I heard it, which was just that has a huge cost in what they're able to sell that product for, and that's a big concern for me.
Yeah, and when this topic first came up, probably 2 years ago, we just, for background information, do we get more appeals than other jurisdictions? So we went back and we looked at just a 2-year window. I think we had 31 appeals. I think Sparks had 2. So and we looked at Washoe County, I think they were closer to 17. We by far have more appeals than most jurisdictions in Northern Nevada. We also looked at the cost that we charge for an appeal versus the rest of Nevada. I think we charge about $100. So if you have $100, you can fill out an application to appeal. By far, we were significantly less. I mean, many other jurisdictions charge thousands of dollars to apply for an appeal. So all of that was kind of taken into consideration as, yes, the process is much easier to appeal. No, we don't have a rule of who can appeal, which tells me a lot of people are appealing. There's definitely staff time involved, there's council time involved, so it's not just the cost to the developer, it's staff time as well. These appeals are incredibly time intensive to prepare staff reports and all the detail that goes into it, and the night meetings, for city council as well. So there's a lot of things that would definitely, I think, be worthwhile to have a discussion, and I'm more than happy to kind of take that discussion further to council and provide them maybe with some best practices of how other communities define a aggrieved party.
In that comparison to Sparks, may I ask, don't they have a lot more opportunity to do administrative planning review of projects, that more of the projects that come into Sparks do not end up at Planning Commission, and therefore, because of that, there are fewer appeals? I don't think it's necessarily there are just more appeals because it's the city of Reno. It's because more projects come to Planning Commission. There are more appeals.
Yes, we have definitely a lot more triggers for public review process than most cities in Nevada.
Can that be addressed?
If you guys would like to see less applications, we could go back and look at our zoning code. I mean, I think this is something we talked about on the affordable housing. We as a city have, and if you want to do apartments and you're less than 100 units, we require that you go through an additional process. That's not normal. That's very outside of normal for most jurisdictions. Most jurisdictions say if you're over 100 units, then you go through a public review process. But we by far have a lot more triggers for public review.
I would caution us maybe from getting a little too overzealous
I think we should keep going. This is a good conversation.
on that point. But I will say generally, I am supportive of finding ways that are practical, that can help streamline these processes, and ultimately, to your point, Angela, to bring us more in line with other jurisdictions. I mean, I think that's the key takeaway. It's good to be ambitious. I like that we're an ambitious body, but I think we have to work with other counterparties that have different levels of ambition. So generally, I'm happy to explore those things, but I think it's worth noting that maybe just with what's acceptable in other jurisdictions.
I have a quick follow-up, if I may, Angela. since you asked, and since we're on a good rhythm here, when we say, bring things more aligned with other jurisdictions or municipalities, at face value, it sounds fine, but I think I would operate better under knowing what other municipalities those are and how's that working for the communities that they serve, right? So like is Eureka or Auburn or some other municipality that we're trying to compare ourselves to, if we are doing something good, and if so, what is that? And is that what we're trying to move towards? Other than just saying, well, everyone else is doing it this way, let's just do that. I don't feel comfortable with that without knowing that there's a trajectory towards community integrity in that process. And so kind of with that in mind, the changes that are being proposed sound really good. And I'm just curious if you can, in layman's terms, describe how these changes help staff do their job effectively, and streamline things for folks while still maintaining the public process.
Yeah, and so as part of this process, this code cleanup, we're not proposing to have less public review. This is us just talking. I think if Planning Commission and City Council wanted to have less public review and more things that go to building permit by right, I would take a step back and look at all of our uses in our zoning code and compare us to other jurisdictions. When we looked at just the multifamily component, so just apartments as one type of use, we looked at Washoe, Carson, Sparks, Fernley, Henderson, Clark, again, as Nevada, right? What are other jurisdictions in Nevada doing about housing and apartments? And definitely, we require a much longer public review process than all of those jurisdictions. If you want me to look at any other type of use, we can do a breakdown and do some research on commercial and office and, any other, again, we've got 200 probably different uses in our zoning code. So I could go down a rabbit hole of research and come back to you with how different we are compared to other jurisdictions. But just generally speaking, by far, Reno has more public review processes.
Well, overanalysis can paralyze us as well.
And it does, yep.
Right? And so I don't think we want to get there, or I don't want to speak for the rest of the body, but I do feel more comfortable moving forward, just in general, if we have data to support some of these decisions or why we're going down a certain path, as opposed to just, well, they're doing it. Well, okay, but they're not Reno, and we're,
We are special.
Yeah.
I mean, in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at this point, we're not proposing anything that we're talking about right now. If you guys want me to look at streamlining processes, happy to do it, but I, as staff, am not proposing to streamline process.
Commissioner Villanueva?
If I may.
Yeah, please, Commissioner, go ahead.
Okay, great. I really like what Commissioner Becerra was saying, because some of the communities you named and you listed, I don't know if we necessarily want to follow in their footprints. But in any case, I have a couple other questions if we're okay with switching topics. Does that work? Or is there anyone else that wants to continue this conversation?
Sorry, Commissioner Rohrmeyer, your mic.
Sorry, turned it off. I had a comment question along those same lines, if you don't mind. Yes, I don't think you need to deep dive into too many land uses. That's not an effective use of staff time. I do think it was admirable you looked into the multifamily and found those comparable, or that we are way beyond. I think that's informative. I also think about the numbers or the types of CUPs, for example, we get here. There are an awful lot of CUPs for 24-hour use in non-industrial zones. That would be one that could be dug into a little further and compare us to, say, a Sparks or some of the communities that are closer by.
Absolutely. That's actually a great one. Reno is probably one of the only jurisdictions that I can think of that triggers a conditional use permit for 24-hour use. Residential adjacency is another one that's really unique to Reno. Most other jurisdictions don't trigger any kind of public review for just being next door to residential zoning. But big picture, those are two big ones that are unique to Reno.
Anything else on this topic? Commissioner Velto? You have that look.
I am supportive of anything that we can make more streamlined, that makes sense and doesn't sacrifice public input where it is needed. I am in support of doing that. So I would, so long as it's not unreasonable for you to look into, by all means, but obviously don't dedicate a bunch of time because of our concerns.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I just had one follow-up. And you're going to be like, what? Not related to any of this. It's actually to your main question, which was, do y'all have feedback about these last 4 chapters? And it's kind of a more benign one. You mentioned that there was a change in the HRC section where you're removing staff from the equation and all that. And since HRC and others weren't part of that little diagram feedback loop that you're doing right now, right, where it's us, then city council, and then so forth, how did they feel about that change?
They supported it. We
Okay.
did go talk to them twice. We met with the HRC on this red line document, not for the zoning code, but just the section related to HRC. We met with them twice.
Oh, okay.
So they were in support of it.
Oh, good.
I think they supported them having more control. And again, staff also supports them having more control.
Oh, okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Just curious about that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, may I?
Yeah, Commissioner Villanueva, please.
Okay, great. So I know we've heard alternative equivalent compliance in the past. I know we've used it in the past. And is that term defined anywhere? I think I did see what I believe to be a definition somewhere, but I want to confirm with you that that is in fact what I saw on page 490. Nope. In any case, yeah, here it is, 18.08.803. It provides a purpose. It gives, describes the purpose for alternative equivalent compliance. I don't know that the term is actually defined, and so it's pretty vague. Is it discretionary? How do we know what is, in fact, is alternative compliance?
Yeah, great question. So it's very similar to a conditional use permit or a site plan review. It's a type of application. So we have a whole section in the zoning code specific to what it is, and when you can use it, and what the findings are that Planning Commission would have to be able to meet in order to approve it. But that's not, I don't know that it's in our definition section, but it's in our section related to process and procedures, similar to a variance or a tentative map or a conditional use permit. It's just more of a type of application that, again, that in that section, it defines what sections of the code you can use that on. The big ones are if you want to do something different for landscaping or screening, those are probably the two biggest ones where we use that alternative equivalent compliance. Sometimes our code is very black and white, and we have unique situations where we say, the code says we have to put in a 6-foot tall, fence. But then we look at the site and we say, wow, like there's such a huge grade change between our site down here and the neighbors up here. If we put in a 6-foot tall fence, it does absolutely nothing to protect those neighbors. So in that kind of a situation, we'd say, yeah, come up with something better, right? Maybe instead of a 6-foot tall fence, which protects absolutely nobody, maybe we have them put in some tall trees, some columnar trees, maybe 10-foot tall. So that's where we would use that AEC process. And it does require Planning Commission review. So you guys get to weigh in to see if, yep, that makes sense, we support it, or no, we don't.
Okay. And then my next, thank you, that does answer my question. And then annexation, I did see some changes there. Did we remove, and maybe I read it wrong, and I can't find it now, but did we remove review from Planning Commission for any annexation, or am I misinterpreting what I saw earlier?
No, so the way, with our last round of zoning code updates, so 3 years ago, this discussion came before council. you guys historically as a body have not reviewed annexations. Those don't come before you. That was a big topic during the code cleanup 3 years ago, and City Council said we still don't feel that it's Planning Commission's role to review annexations because it's more of a policy decision. But what we found in our code, while that's how we administer it, annexations, we don't go to Planning Commission, they go straight to City Council. There's a table in our code that says, here's what Planning Commission reviews, here's what City Council reviews. The table is wrong. The table shows that Planning Commission is a reviewing body for annexations, so that's not correct. That was wrong, so we're cleaning that up.
Okay, that's what that was that I saw. Okay. Because I saw the R strict through. Okay. And you're right. I do recall that we don't review annexation. Okay. And then I did have one more question that I did not write down, so I forgot. But if it comes to me, I will ask. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Okay, so if you're good, there was about 5 topics that you guys brought up over the last couple weeks. I just want to hit those again and make sure we have your feedback moving forward. So again, here's a list of those 5 things. I'm going to take each one individually. We had talked about tattoo parlors. I think somebody maybe had called or talked to some of the planning commissioners about where we allow tattoo parlors. Here's just our existing table that shows tattoo parlors in all the different zoning districts. P means it's permitted. There was a question as to why we don't allow tattoo parlors in more zoning districts, specifically the downtown. So again, as a topic, if you guys are interested, we can go back and look at where tattoo parlor use would be allowed and propose some of those changes before this goes to council for their feedback.
I had brought it up, so I'm still in favor of that approach, as long as there's no, I guess, pushback on that.
I think that's a good idea. Commissioner Villanueva, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts as well, Commissioner Becerra. Beyond our body, was there public comment or just comment that y'all have received on this topic?
We recently had a zone change on Plum Lane where the business was a tattoo parlor, and they were they came through for a business license, and through that process, they discovered they were not in a zoning district that allowed tattoo parlors. I think they were in a PO zoning. So it kind of brought to light, where do we allow tattoo parlors? We do get a lot of people that open tattoo businesses without even realizing they have to have that zoning. So this comes up quite a bit from a business license perspective. I think too, years ago, tattoo parlors maybe had a different connotation. Tattoo parlors are very different now. You take your 6-year-old to get her ears pierced at a tattoo parlor. I think it's not a big scary place like maybe it was, 30 years ago. So I think understanding that tattoo parlors could also be, makeup, permanent makeup. It could be other things, not just tattoos. We may just, again, we can look at best practices. Where do other jurisdictions allow tattoo parlors? Okay. All right, next topic then is we had some public input on creating a noise ordinance in downtown Reno. So we have a lot of new residents moving into the downtown, and so we are definitely kind of dealing with these growing pains of we love the idea that people are moving into our downtown, but we also have a lot of 24-hour noisy activity in downtown, and how do we kind of marry those two together? So just so you're aware, our zoning code currently right now, we do regulate noise, but only if you are adjacent to residential zoning. So nowhere in downtown is it zoned residential. So we don't have a noise ordinance for downtown. Again, just looking for your feedback. We're not proposing anything at this point, just asking from a planning commissioner's perspective, is this something you feel we should move forward? We'll definitely be talking about this with City Council as well, but just looking for your feedback on the topic.
Commissioner Velto? Rohrmeyer?
Go ahead.
I don't know how you could possibly enforce a noise ordinance in downtown, given all the events that happen. I think part of what makes downtown great is that there's a lot of activity, people moving around, that strengthens the city. I would be concerned with how you'd even be able to enforce this when you have the Santa Crawl or the Santa Run or like shows in the park and things that we want to have to strengthen our downtown area. I don't really know how you could even enforce this, and I'm not a fan of outright noise ordinance in downtown.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Velto. Sound is part of the urban fabric and very much part of a downtown experience.
Commissioner Becerra, your mic's on. Did you intend to speak?
Oh, it's just out of habit.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Villanueva, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would just ask the commission, and maybe we can ask city, what's the vision? I mean, what do we envision for the downtown? Do we want to continue having housing and multifamily downtown? And if that is the goal, how do we marry it? Because we've heard from residents in the past, whenever there are requests for to be able to stay open. I think we had one a few months ago to be able to stay open till 3 certain days of the week, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Certainly on the weekend, I don't think that there should be any, but what's the goal? What's our vision? Clearly it's what we have isn't working, and certainly not the Santa crawls or the crawls, but maybe the concerts and the music. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, but I think we do need to ask the question, what is the vision and what do we see for the future of downtown?
Commissioner Munoz.
I think this is a more difficult question than we could even begin to answer tonight. With the state of housing market and what we have here, the people that are buying the apartments and the condominiums in the downtown area are of an older demographic that don't want the loud noise, the concerts, the Santa Claus. They're not inclined to partake in those events. At the same time, what makes Reno special is the tens of thousands of people that come over for those events from out of the area. That's really what drives the economy here. That's really what makes Reno special, is because people can come from as far as San Francisco and places that are 4 or 5 hours away to enjoy exactly what we're talking about right now. And so it's really a difficult question. And honestly, for me personally, the way I look at it is that is what fuels Reno. It really is. Not the residents that have purchased those condominiums and those apartments in the downtown area. So I think if we stay with the character of what Reno is, what Reno wants to be, how we enjoy the nightlife, how we enjoy the special events, which Reno is known for throughout the world, we'd really be shooting ourselves in the foot if we were to put a noise ordinance or something like that to really limit those events. So I'm in agreement with the rest of the council. I don't think that's a box of worms that we really want to open.
Yeah, and I think some of the other just discussions we've had with some of the downtown residents, it's the noise is one piece, right? The noise from the sidewalks at 3 a.m. where people are just out having a good time, but the bass from a lot of these live entertainment bars. If you're ever out at 3 in the morning, go to the 2nd Street as a street, there's several bars that just have a pounding bass that go literally all night. And I think that is one thing that the residents have explained to us is, they're fine with the bars and the 24-hour use, but is there something we could do to help kind of calm the techno, the bass? Citywide, we are looking at other approaches to downtown and things we can do to help with some of the enforcement. So that's something we're going to be discussing with City Council and our police chief later this month. So like I said, I think it's a topic that I know we're going to discuss with City Council, but this is good feedback to see where this goes.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah, please do, Commissioner.
As someone who's lived in multiple downtown communities, I lived at the Ogden in downtown Las Vegas. I lived on U Street in Washington, D.C. And so these big cities where the downtown is the core and kind of what makes people want to visit, I will say I loved it. I loved living in those communities, but there is a balance, because when you have to work the next day and there's music right next door till 3, 4 a.m., it really makes it unbearable and it drives people away. And so you don't want to drive people away from living in your downtown community, because that's how you get, that's how we promote walkability. That's how we promote public transit. That's how we lower emissions. That's how we get, environmental justice and all those things, inclusivity, all those things that we care about. And when you drive people away, you lose a lot of that. And so we got to really balance. Yes, the economy is important, and yes, the businesses are important, but we really got to balance that with the people. And so that's something to think about. Again, no answer or solutions here, but just some thoughts.
Commissioner Becerra.
Sure. Thank you. I'll just kind of build upon that and what you also said, Angela, in looking into maybe a solution, because I do think that two things can be true. I do think that we can keep Reno downtown weird and fun and all that, the way a lot of folks enjoy it. And I do think that we can find clever ways to reduce the tremors, if you will, and guide people towards a pathway where folks can get some good shut-eye and still enjoy themselves and so forth. And to that, I remember you presenting on, maybe it was the ADUs, dare I say the A word there, or something else, but you had brought in a consultant where you studied like lots of cities to see what they were doing. And I'm not sure if some of that data included like data that can be relevant or helpful on this topic, like what are other cities doing in their downtown corridor where it keeps it special and unique, but still helps address some of these factors. Because I know that it's not, there was a comment made just earlier that there are a lot of folks moving here, maybe in the downtown corridor from out of town, but that's not true. I know a lot of lifelong Nevadans that are simply downsizing. They lived here their whole life and they just want to downsize. They don't want a yard, but they move downtown and so forth, right? So it's not about out-of-towners or in-towners. It's just people trying to find a good quality of life while enjoying what Reno has to offer.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
May I just add one comment?
Yeah, please.
Okay, Commissioner Rohrmeyer again. I feel like this is not a land use. That's like the wrong category for this sort of regulation, that this is in a building materials and building code. This is a triple pane window, acoustic wall. This is in a materials solution and not in a land use designation. So if that is a place that maybe the city could look into, looking at sound, it might be a better fit.
Okay. Two more to come, I'm sure, to be determined. All right, and then Commissioner Villanueva, we had talked about this last time. I just wanted to kind of bring it back for you guys again. We have a section of our code that deals with landscaping and parking lots. And so anytime you have a parking lot, you have to have a certain number of spaces based on what your use is. So hypothetically, let's say you have a shopping center and you're required to have 100 parking spaces. We require a certain number of trees for every parking space and a certain number of shrubs for every tree. So that is inherent, no matter what, that still happens. The discussion we had was we have a section of code that says if you have more than 150% of the required parking. So in our example, you're required to have 100 spaces. Let's say you have 151 because you as the developer feel that you need 151. Our code actually penalizes you for having more parking than our code requires. And so it requires additional landscaping, again, above and beyond the trees and the shrubs you already have to have. So our discussion last time, staff had proposed to delete this. We felt it was a penalty. If developers feel they need more parking, we felt that this was kind of a deterrent. Parking is one of those tough topics. People either love parking or hate parking. We typically don't get a lot of developers that have 150% more parking than code requires, but definitely for some of these one-off situations where maybe you're a use where you know you're going to have a lot of employees. So we just said, well, that, again, this doesn't seem to be from staff's perspective, something that's really helpful, and we felt like it was penalizing people that just needed more parking. But I wanted to bring it back. I know the discussion was maybe we do want to, not necessarily penalize them, but maybe we do want above and beyond more landscaping because they are providing, more parking and more asphalt. So again, collectively as the group, let me know your thoughts on whether or not we should keep this section of code or delete it.
Commissioner Rohrmeyer?
Commissioner Rohrmeyer with all the opinions. I would like to say that I strongly feel that this is the right direction. We should not be over parking. I understand the developers want more parking. Only in one case have I ever seen it as a good justification, and that's up at the university where there's large developments and every room belongs to a student with a car. We have a lot of parking, surface parking, a lot of parking lots. This is the city of Reno has more urban heat effect than other cities in America. More trees, more shrubs, those are necessary, should not be overparked. So please consider keeping this.
Okay. Anyone else on this one? Okay.
Third.
Fourth. Any additional
Okay.
comments? Commissioner Villanueva?
No, thank you. I appreciate you looking into that and bringing that back.
Absolutely. Okay, next topic is schools. And I know Kyle's here from the school district as well. This is a follow-up. We had a pretty good discussion on some of the language that staff was proposing. Again, we had added some language that said, hey, as a heads up, when you come in for a building permit, whether you're a public school or private school, doesn't matter, know that we are going to ask for things like, how are you handling drop-off and pickup, and where's the queuing line, and where are the school flashers and the crosswalks. So you'd asked, well, give me more information on schools that have been developed just even in the past couple years where we have gone back after the fact and added additional pedestrian improvements, whether it was crosswalks or flashers. So again, we just high level, last couple years, here's a number of schools that have kind of been problematic. Some of these are brand new schools. Some of these have been here for probably 40 years. But again, as times change and neighborhoods grow, our needs for, pedestrian safety also changes. So here's just a list of some of those schools that in the last couple years, we have had to go back after the fact and put in new infrastructure. So with that in mind, know that this is something that is important to us as staff and definitely important to our city council. So that is why, again, we are proposing to add that language. It doesn't mandate anything. It just says, know that when you come in with a new school or an improvement to a school, we're going to look at these things. So we did work with the school district. The top kind of two sentences is what we had initially proposed in the zoning code. The school district proposed some additional language, which is there on the bottom. It's essentially, and Kyle, let me know if you disagree, but I think it's essentially the same language, again, at the time of the building permit for a new school or major redesign or expansion to an existing school. Know that we're going to be asking for this information. The one thing we just disagreed with, I crossed out and read there so you can have just full understanding. There was some language proposed that the school district asked if we could have some language saying that only require these things or ask for these things to the extent possible and within the school's control. It's not really a standard, not something I can really enforce, so I just proposed to take that out. But I think, again, we as city staff and the school district, I think are in agreement, and I support the language that they proposed. Any questions on this one?
Commissioner Becerra, please.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for working with the school district after the last meeting. I did hear I think this works for them. I would like to hear maybe from Kyle, if you can, just to get that thing to a, yes, this definitely works for us, or maybe it doesn't.
Thank you, Commissioners. Kyle Chisholm, Washington County School District. Yes, I can confirm that we provided this language. It does work for us, and we think it clears up a lot of the ambiguity that we had concerns with, so yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for working with staff as well.
Yep, and thank you, staff.
Yeah, dream team. There you go.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay. Any other topics on schools? Okay. And then finally, again, just as a follow-up from our last meeting, Commissioner Villanueva, I promised that I would bring back some specific examples of what's in our code today related to setback and step backs. So what I've done, I've provided 3 slides so you can see what's in code today. So basically, if you have new development and you're next to single-family homes, or even just single-family zoning or some multifamily zoning. Again, in trying to protect that neighborhood character, what we don't want to see is, a new 5-story building coming in, being built 5 feet away from the property line where you've got a single-story house next door. So in our code today, we have kind of 3 different sets of standards, and our challenge is they're very confusing. The images don't necessarily match the wording, so I'm going to go through so you can see what those are, and then I'm going to show you what we're proposing. So these are the ones that are in code today. I've just provided some comment there in red. Again, reasons we don't like these, things that we just have a hard time interpreting. So this first one, it's specific to your front building setback. Now, typically your front setback on a new house or a new apartment is a street. So this one, to begin with, didn't make sense. We basically are saying you have to push the building back depending on what use is across the street. And again, that didn't make sense. And that really goes in like the opposite direction of trying to encourage infill. We're basically saying you have to push the building back from a street. For what purpose? That doesn't make sense. So we proposed, again, this really conflicted on a lot of sites that we were working on and didn't make sense. So we're saying this doesn't make sense, let's take it out. Next one, this is specific to side setbacks. So essentially we have this kind of a 2-to-1 ratio. A 1-to-1 ratio. So currently, if you have a new building that's coming in and it's more than 24 feet, so 2 stories is typically 24 feet, and that image on the right is a good example. The code right now says you need to do a step back. So basically, once you get to 24 feet and your new building's still taller than that, any portion of your new building that's over 24 feet and taller than, you have to step that side of the building. So you could technically have like a 5-story building as long as you are stepping back the 3rd story and the 4th story and the 5th story. This in our mind was kind of confusing because it was specific to just the side. Well, what about the rear? A lot of times we have these infill sites where there's a rear, and again, you're just feet away from the property line and you've got, 3 stories looming over somebody's backyard. How do we protect that neighborhood? So again, we liked this concept, but we felt we could do better. And so again, we're proposing to remove this. Finally, and this is one, I just think you should read it and tell me what this means. So this is specific, within the rear setback and the larger of the front setback or 15 feet from any front property line. Portions of any building that exceed 12 feet in height shall maintain an additional 1-foot side yard for each foot of height over 12 feet. I have no idea what that means. We have just gotten to the point where we just don't even use it because nobody can interpret what it means.
Yeah, I think anything that reads like a GMAT question and not like a procedural standard that someone can understand, it's probably a good idea to strike it.
Yes.
It's my 2 cents anyway.
So we're proposing to remove that one as well. So we wanted to simplify it. Again, our concern, and we added a new image. And it was, again, the intent was to show you a little bit more understanding of, we like that 1-to-1 ratio. So again, if you're 2 stories next to, your new building's 2 stories, great, 24 feet in height. But if anything taller than 24 feet in height, we want you to step back those additional 3rd stories or 4th stories or just the roof line. So we provided an image. And then we also provided some additional standards that help to better explain what it is. So one is we said this standard applies to your side setbacks and your rear setbacks. So we don't have any requirements for front setbacks to push the building back. But again, we're concerned about your side and your rear. Again, if you have a public right-of-way, so maybe there's like an alley in your back, then you would be exempt from this standard. And then we've also had a couple cases where we've had maybe some decks or some canopies, and the code was not clear as to, are they allowed to also, be within that normal setback, or do they have to step that portion of the building back? So we just clarified that, yes, if you have a canopy or a deck or something that's popping out of your new building, yes, you also need to comply with this rule. And then there's special unique situations where maybe you can't make it work, but maybe you want to do something different. So we did require kind of an out. If you want to do a major site plan review to show how you can't meet this step back, but maybe you want to do something else, we do have that as an option. That does come before Planning Commission, so you guys as a commission would be able to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Again, our intent here was just to make it clean and understandable and delete all the weird language and images that none of us could understand. Questions on that?
Okay.
I think it's wonderful. With the exception, why not a minor SPR instead of a major SPR?
And we could do that as well. So a minor site plan review is what we call a 30-day review. It just goes to a staff for review, but we do public noticing. If anyone wants to appeal staff's decision, it would go to City Council on appeal. So I'm 100% comfortable if Planning Commission would prefer just a minor site plan review versus the major, also totally on board with that.
So just a clarification on that, Angela, the minor would include what between the major? What's the?
A minor site plan review is an application that just staff reviews. It does
Right.
not go to Planning Commission.
Right, but there was something about the public and an appeal that.
Yep, so our minor site plan review applications, we do send out public postcards. So the neighbors, everyone within 750 feet would
Gotcha.
be notified about it. There just wouldn't be a public hearing.
Any reason why we wouldn't want to include, I mean, are we gaining something by not including the public?
I think it goes back to the previous discussion of streamlining, right? If you're trying to get more housing to market faster, then streamlining the process, still giving the public input because they would now know it's a project that's coming before them and they would have the ability to comment on it. And those comments help staff to write their conditions of approval.
Yeah, I think I'm all for streamlining, but not cutting corners on the public input process, where possible. And I do have a question, Jared, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Beyond this. You mentioned like clarifying things and if this makes sense, and we all attempted to read or decipher the previous sentence. It makes sense to folks now what you're proposing, and I'm curious, what you're proposing, has that gone before the technical group as well? And then just so we understand that, like, hey, we're understanding it, but are folks that are needing to review the documents understanding it as well? Is a layperson been grabbed to say, hey, do you understand what this?
I don't think any average citizen would understand half of our zoning code.
Okay.
Appreciate the feedback, but generally speaking, nobody understands the zoning code, including us half the time. But what we can do is we can do some random kind of spot checks, which we've done that on different sections of the code, where we throw it out to some of our internal staff and say, use this section of the code, how would you apply it? We've also done it with just some of the architects and some of the other designers and say, does this make sense? So this is one of those, definitely we could send it out and just get some peer review.
Yeah,
Yep.
and then the last thing is, what's the shelf life on this thing? Like, are we going to review this in 8 years, 4 years?
The zoning code?
Like all this cleanup, all this, like this is, a lot of needed work, but will I be seeing this again in my lifetime or no?
I think, a typical zoning code is reviewed on a regular basis, right? As we find new
Okay.
sections of code, not necessarily repeating the same thing over and over. But, the code we have now, we've had for 3 years, but we've probably done maybe 3 or 4 text amendments to our code over the last 3 years. So we are always doing better, looking for ways to improve. I think too, if we have a section of code and we find that it just doesn't make sense, or council says we need to be more strict or we need to be less restrictive, then we'd go back and make modifications.
Okay, I actually like that. It goes back to what I said. I like the tight feedback loop, and things change, life
Yep.
changes, and where we're at now may be a little different than where we're at and need to be a year from now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Great job.
This is Commissioner Villanueva. To the change from major to minor, for something like this, generally, actually, it depends what it is. I get where you guys are all coming from. Well, those in favor of removing the major and changing it to a minor site plan review. But with something like this, where we're talking height and setbacks and step backs, those tend to be what some of the residents really care about. Like if we get public comment, it tends to be with regard to that in particular. Height is a big one, and the setback stuff is just really important to a lot of the neighbors and the community. So I'd hate to take that out of the process. I really do like the idea with respect to that being available to the public. So yeah, just some comments to take back, something to consider. Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Rohrmeyer?
Just to follow up to that point, I think on something like a step back, this is a pretty small case by case, and the architect, particularly in contemporary contemporary architecture, that probably has the most challenges to meet some of these provisions. Those can be worked out with staff best. I'm not sure in having 7 opinions of people who aren't in the design field are really the best way to make those solutions. So I would strongly encourage a minor SPR.
I don't think it's about us having the involvement. I think it's just about the public involvement, and so that they can kind of understand the process. And I get that they get notified, and I get that they can approach staff and have those conversations with staff. But we don't, I at least don't know what that's like. I've been fortunate to where I've never been put in a position where I'm concerned about a development in my community and I have to reach out to staff. I imagine staff's great and probably, maintains open communication. But people work, people have jobs. I just don't know how accommodating that process is. And so it's not about the 7 of us having input. It's really just about maintaining that public access and that public input. Certainly with respect to height.
Okay, anything else on that topic then? That's the end. So again, this covers the entire zoning code. We've talked a lot. Everything that we've talked about will come back before you after I get some council feedback. So again, this is not like the only time you're going to have input on this. I'll come back, and I'm guessing council will also have some additional things that they want to see that we had not included. So we'll definitely be discussing all of those later this probably fall by the time it comes back to you guys.
I have a follow-up on that.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Becerra, you mentioned the fall, and so what's going to occur between now and then? Is it just doing some of the research and follow-up of this discussion, or is it going to be also including combing through public input, and how does the public input weave into the recommendation to City Council between now and then? Or
So at this point, we're not proposing any additional stakeholder meetings. We held nine stakeholder meetings. If you guys want more, I could do it all day long. I didn't feel that we were getting much community feedback, so at some point, let's just move something or not. And that's kind of where I'm at. So next steps is we'll go to council. We'll probably have 3 public meetings with council, kind of like we did here, where we broke it up into smaller bites. So we'll do that with them. Again, from a policy direction, they may have some additional things that they want us to look at. So then we'll make some more red line changes, then we'll come back and bring it to Planning Commission. So all of that, those are all public meetings. They're noticed on the agendas, and of course, before we formally make a recommendation on an ordinance, council will see it again. So we probably have at least 6 more meetings before anything's adopted here in the next 6 months. And council may say, go back and get more stakeholder input. So we'll see where this goes.
just so we have a clear understanding, because you just held like 4, you and staff, right? You held like 4.
We just held 4 stakeholder meetings on the topic of housing and affordability.
Okay.
Not on the zoning code.
Okay.
Again, we have multiple text amendments happening right now. That's the other thing. We're talking about ADUs. We're going to hold a lot of stakeholder input on that. That's going to come before you. Housing and affordability, we're trying to push that through City Council before July 1st. Most likely not going to happen. We have a sign ordinance we're going to need to move forward. We have telecommunications ordinance we need to move forward. So all these initiatives, City Council has asked us to work on. So there's many things happening in the process along with all these changes. But again, nothing happens overnight, and council also takes a break in the summer. So we're trying to kind of make sure that we don't inundate council with too many zoning code agenda items on one council agenda. So it will take a while to get through the system.
Well, thank you, Angela, and
Yeah.
your two crew right behind you.
Before we close, oh, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Villanueva.
Jared, I waited till the end because I remembered the question I was going to ask earlier with regard to the ordinance, or excuse me, the changes overview. And it was with respect to 24-hour operation. We talked about the changes to the 24-hour operation and the data centers. And so how does that work with the data center? What do we consider operation with the data center? Because data centers, I mean, is that with regard to employment? Is that with regard to just data centers operating in general? Or is that, I mean, how does that work with the data center? What do we deem 24-hour operation?
Yeah, so we just created a new definition for data center. So we define what it is, and we created new zoning districts where we would allow them. Data centers are very different from like warehousing or manufacturing. And so they don't fit your typical industrial building. We also require a conditional use permit everywhere a data center is allowed. We feel like they're kind of a one-off. We want to be able to look at them on a case-by-case basis. So every data center, first you have to look and say, is it allowed in that zoning district? I think we have, 5 zoning districts where we allow them. And every one of them would still require a conditional use permit. So we could look at all the kind of the nuances of where it's at and impacts to the kind of the surrounding area.
So the 24-hour operation, how does that play into it?
We know that data centers don't shut off at 11 o'clock at night, right? I mean, the very function of a data center is to store data in a building, in a, some kind of IT system. It's my high technical term for data center. But we know that they operate 24 hours a day, just inherently, kind of like a hotel. We know that people are there 24 hours a day. Data centers will be running, machines will be running 24 hours a day. Very different from like a logistics center where you have the choice, right? Are people going to be coming and dropping off boxes at 2 a.m. or do they shut down at 11 o'clock at night? But we know a data center will have staff and machines 24 hours a day, just because they have to.
Okay. So that's something, yeah.
Yep, and so we don't require a second conditional use permit because they're 24 hours. We inherently just know they will operate 24 hours, but we will always trigger a conditional use permit for any new data center.
So that's part of the review process. So when we're reviewing for the initial CUP, we factor that in.
Yep.
Okay. And one more question. With that, data centers, I know with their machines, I know how they generally operate. No trucks, no big semis, nothing like that? Or is that something what's your experience with data centers?
Yep, and the same thing. So most of them are in big warehouse buildings, and they don't need a lot of dock doors. We do allow them. We did put in some language that you can have dock doors, but I think we limited it to 3 dock doors per building, just because you have equipment being delivered. But they don't operate like a warehouse or a logistics center. They operate very differently. So from that perspective, the things we're looking at is noise, definitely lighting. A lot of these data centers are lit up pretty bright for safety reasons. And so we'd be looking at that from a kind of a residential protection perspective of, where's the nearest residence? What are they doing to screen the lights? Those are the types of things we would want to see as part of a conditional use permit.
Okay, and then lastly, I promise, last question. We talked again, 24 hours near residential. My question is, if it's a 24-hour operation, if we suspect that a project is going to be 24-hour operation, regardless of whether or not it's near residential, is it subject to CUP review?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
So we can consider during the review process whether or not it makes sense, particularly given that it's near residential, to have 24-hour operations.
Yes, all uses outside of the downtown area, pretty much all uses that want to operate past 11 o'clock at night trigger a conditional use permit for 24-hour use. A lot of the Starbucks, right, they open before 6 a.m. they also trigger a conditional use permit for 24-hour use. So any use pretty much outside of the downtown area, past 11 o'clock at night, restaurants, bars, all of them, have to go through that public review process.
Got it. All right, thank you so much. Also, I appreciate your work. I know this is not easy for you guys trying to do it all, so thank you so much.
Great.
Before closing item 6, just wanted to, I guess it's a formality at this point, but is there anyone in the chambers wishing to speak on public comment? I don't see anyone. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
There's no one on Zoom. We did not receive any voicemails. Correspondence was received and forwarded to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. We will close item 6 and move on to item 7, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report.
Sure. Last meeting was canceled. The next meeting, I believe, is next week. So there'll be an update next month or at the next meeting.
Thank you. Closing item 7, moving on to item 8, staff announcements.
Just a couple of quick announcements this evening. First, I think as you probably saw tonight, we're implementing a new procedure that staff will present projects before the applicant. So moving forward on development projects, the staff will give their staff report and presentation, and then that will be followed by an applicant presentation. So mixing that up, and that's really to be more consistent with other jurisdictions and kind of an accepted practice, so to speak. Staff is working on some training modules based on the direction we received from you last time, so those will be coming forward here over the next couple of months. And then just to follow up on council approvals, you had kind of a flurry of zone changes at your last 2 meetings. So those included the White Lake Commerce Center specific plan district, the Plum Lane properties, 525 East Plum Lane, and then the North Virginia Street at Webb Circle project. Those were all approved by council, so they upheld your recommendation. And that's all the updates I have for this evening.
Great, thank you. We'll close item 8, move to item 9, commissioners' suggestions for future agenda items. Do you have any suggestions? Sylvia on Zoom.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Closing item 9 and item 10, public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. Seeing no public comment in the chambers, do we have anyone on Zoom?
No, no one on Zoom, no correspondence and received, and no voicemails.
Okay, thank you. Closing item 10 and moving to item 11, adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Aye.